Welcome, everybody. I'm Demitrius Nelon. I'm a product manager at Microsoft, and I work on Winget. First off, I want to say thanks to all of our sponsors. Their generous attention is really what's made the conference possible and provided the awesome food that PowerShell Conference EU is known for. So, been at Microsoft for about 7 years now, primarily working on Winget. Some of the other things in the OS is what I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. Prior to that, I did some work in Azure. So I'm going to cover a little bit of what's happened since we've done the last few releases. So in Winget 1.6, the new feature was configuration. And we knew that we couldn't do configuration management without a reliable package manager. So the main thing that was needed was support for dependencies. And that feature also included downloads so that you could just download the installers to work with some offline types of connected environments. The following release in February, we added support so you could pass a URL in as a parameter for the configuration. A lot of security work went into that. It may seem like a small feature. It was a big deal to get through all the security reviews, looking at smart screen reputation checks and other things like that to make sure that you're not going to get a man-in-the-middle type of a scenario. We did the PowerShell module, making Winget repair as a commandlet. So repair Winget package manager works in Windows PowerShell as well as PowerShell 7. It's designed to help you get things bootstrapped and get Winget into a good state so that everything will function. The other thing that we added support for was Windows features as a dependency. We had several packages in the community repository that wanted things like .NET or IAS or other Windows features enabled. Because of some reboot complexities, it took a while to get that built in. Then we start getting into 1.8, where we realize when you're running configurations, you don't want to get prompted in the middle with a UAC and a dialog to hit OK or cancel. So we added the notion of being able to do an elevated configuration and having the ability to have both things that require and things that prohibit elevation. We also added support so you could download applications from the Microsoft Store, which was in large part to help kind of replace the large gap that was left behind when the Store for Business was retired. And we added HTTP proxy support. We were getting a lot of requests from enterprise customers that wanted to route that traffic through a proxy so that they could pay attention rather than just opening up all different websites or ports to the network. And we've also got several people in other countries that have interesting network challenges that also wanted proxy support. With Winget 1.9, we finally figured out how to handle the single UAC for elevation. So if the configuration file has security context elevated, specified for one of the resources, and I'll go into more detail about that afterwards, but just kind of the high level, what'll happen is Winget knows that needs to be elevated. You'll see a shield in the output that's getting displayed, and that one acceptance of the elevation handles that for the entire configuration. So anything that needs elevation runs in an elevated process. Everything else runs in a user process. So we took the security layer very seriously on that. There still are a few exceptions on packages in the community repository that the installer will still trigger a UAC. That's not something that Winget can get in front of or bypass, nor should we. But we're working with reaching out to those vendors to see if there's a way we can help them improve their installers. We also added sixels for icons. They're a 6-pixel image format that allows you to do basically graphics or artwork in the terminal. We had a lot of people that wanted to see the icons for the packages in there and to be able to expose those. And so other tools like Winget UI that leverage Winget's APIs now can actually display product icons, and you can also see them in the terminal. The other thing that was really big in this release was enabling us to have experimental features. We used to have it where the stable builds couldn't even run experimental features, even though we had group policy support for that. That was really an internal policy challenge, not a technical one. I finally got the approval to be able to go out and do that. So for an enterprise and you don't want these experimental features, no problems. Set up the group policy and it'll prevent that from being possible. What it does give me as a benefit is a lot of people are early adopters. They want to take a new bug fix or a new feature in. or they want to be on an internal build, and when they get a stable build with features disabled, it kind of breaks their experience. So this gives us continuity and kind of the best of both worlds. Winget 1.10, which is our last release, it's the current stable one. We added intra-ID for REST, which now means you can stand up your own private Winget REST source on Azure. Whenever users connect to it, they have to be authenticated as valid intra-ID users. And that is the only way they can get access to that REST source. Now, there is one, you might think of it as another concern. We're addressing that in the future, but that is the installers still need to be available directly to the user without authentication. We've done the work in the client to support that. We just don't have that code released yet in the REST source that's being made public. That release is expected to come out probably in a week or two. The other thing, and this is very near and dear to probably many of you who use PowerShell. I don't know if anybody in here does that. But basically, when we built the CLI, there were a lot of assumptions that were made early on. Back then, we were looking at Nano Server, and PowerShell was not on Nano Server. So we essentially had gotten some feedback. Don't worry about PowerShell. Just go with whatever you're going to do. We went with C++ WinRT. One of the very first issues that showed up was, hey, why not PowerShell? This is an obvious miss for the IT community. Without PowerShell, nobody will take it seriously. I took that very seriously, but there's a lot of complexity in rebuilding everything. So one of the big things that we did recently was we added the ability to configure the Winget sources through our COM APIs. Our PowerShell modules actually speak COM, and we're still refactoring. So the idea is in the future, our CLI, the PowerShell modules, and all third-party integrations are all going to be using the exact same APIs, and we'll be able to give full parity for all the functionality. Winget 1.11 is in preview. We just released our release candidate build. It's already been flighted out to Windows Insider builds all the way through release preview. That adds support for Microsoft desired state configuration. That's kind of the new branding around what you might have heard before as PowerShell DSC v3. We built on v2 and we call invoke DSC resource with a v2 configuration, but now we actually use the DSC executable and we actually can do DSC v3. The big thing that was announced at build was exporting your local configuration. How many of you love the idea of sitting down and handcrafting some YAML to make your exact configuration the same as what you have on your device? No, I'm not a fan either. So my boss told me a long time ago, I just want the easy button, as if it was easy to build. So we've actually done that. What will happen is Winget will go through, it will inspect everything it can on your system. It will then actually generate a configuration file that matches what you've got for everything that is DSC v3 enabled, so that we can actually get even your settings, not just the list of applications, back out. The other thing we did was we implemented several DSC v3 resources, and those are native in the application. And we did work with the PowerShell team with DSC 3.1 to be able to actually go look inside of a packaged application to see if those resource files are present and expose all of that as things that you can configure without having to go download an external PowerShell module. So you're literally using the application as its own resource. We've also got a pull request open on PowerToys to be able to do the same thing with PowerToys. The last time I looked at it, it generates about 1,500 lines of YAML because of all of the settings for every single one of the PowerToys. We've done a proof of concept with Windows Terminal. We'll be working on getting that one in as soon as we can. And we've been working with the PowerShell team about getting our PowerShell profiles out and any other PowerShell settings. I've also been talking with the WSL team, the Windows subsystem for Linux, to be able to grab any of those settings out as well. And the big elephant in the room really at this point is the Windows settings. Many of those things, you can go into the UI, you can look at them, but you have no programmatic access to them. Many of them are registry keys. Lots of people have reverse engineered and figured it out, but I don't have an effective way to go in and pull all those settings out. But for the ones that are documented, we're pulling those settings out. So let's jump into some demos. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that I have the right version of Winget on here. And I'm glad I did because it updated me. So I need to drop down to the earlier version. So all of our releases for the client are out at GitHub. And I'm just going to go download and install it from the releases real quick. Apologies for the delay there. I'm on an internal build. Our feature team keeps moving forward. We've been doing weekly releases of Winget. This is kind of the first time it's caught me off guard. So kind of exciting to run into that. So I'm actually going to downgrade from the 1.12 preview that just got shipped to the 1.11 release candidate. We're expecting this is going to go GA tomorrow. And didn't go that time. Try one more time. I always love it when the demos get me right as I go up on stage. There we go. All right, who's got a question while this is running? Somebody get an early one in? Go ahead. I should not have to restart terminal for this particular update to happen. Winget is a packaged application, so there's an app execution alias. So with that, it already knows where Winget is when I call it, as opposed to having something typical as on your path. So I shouldn't have to restart the terminal for that to happen. But there are comm servers that Winget has that are possibly going to get in the way with doing an update. So sometimes you'll do this kind of an update where you'll install, you'll attempt to go in. Winget won't be on the latest version. You can go into Task Manager. You can look for Winget. You'll see it's talking about comm server. Kill that process, and then it'll come back up. And normally the hint that I'll get, there's a display that'll pop up and say for proper functioning of the package. It's just a bug in App Installer, and I'll just hit the X to go with that. But it looks like it's upgraded. There we go. That's better. So first thing, run the help command. I'm going to only touch on a couple of these. So a lot of people want to know about accepting agreements and the concerns there. The configuration files absolutely can and will accept agreements for you, and you'll see this in a big yellow warning text. You want to be sure that you're not doing anything that you didn't expect. So make sure you know where these configuration files are coming from and what's inside of them. So I'm going to show the double-click experience. There's that bug that I was telling you about. I'm going to go ahead and double-click this demo.winget file. So we've made a file handler so that if your file extension ends in .winget, you can basically have it hooked up to your default terminal. It will just pick up and run winget configure with that configuration file, just like you had typed it on the command line. It's just an ease of experience helper. What it's going to do is go through and take a look at what's in the configuration file. It's going to try to determine if all of those resources available and what their settings are. And then I get the lovely yellow wall of text that says, you know, user beware here. You'll notice this top one, the Windows settings, has got a shield on it. This is what I had talked about earlier for mixed elevation. It's going to change my Windows settings. It's going to set my background color to dark, and it's going to align the taskbar on the left when I hit yes. It's doing a UAC prompt. This is the only prompt that it should have to do for me. And it's now going to actually go in and start making those changes and making sure that these other packages are installed on the system. The main thing this is doing is just getting my system in some state other than the default state so that we can actually see something visual in the demo that I'm going to do. While this is running, I'm going to go ahead and make a connection to a Microsoft DevBox. So use the Windows app for that. If you're not familiar with Microsoft DevBox, it is a cloud-based solution that allows you to have a developer environment that's defined all by configuration as code. It also supports and leverages Winget for being able to do that, and really kind of ties everything that we've been doing in together. Historically, There was no single automation tool, certainly nothing native that would allow you to go in and configure windows. And my timing here was just a little bit lucky that while I was doing that, it actually changed the system color mode with that application up and running. I will note there, I think it's a bug. I'm working on it with the team. If you've got multiple monitors, you'll notice that only the main monitor gets the changes applied, the other ones don't. But if you do a reset or restart Explorer, it will. Interesting challenges, just stuff that we're working through. So now that I've got my system configured in a state other than where I started, I want to be able to capture the state of my device. So I'm going to run winget configure export. I'm going to get back to my desktop so I don't have to go find this. I'm going to specify all, and I'm going to put it in a file named config.winget. It'll just overwrite the one that's on my desktop. So be careful when you're doing this. It's an overwrite type of a behavior. And it's going to now go through, it's going to look and make sure that it has all the things it needs for export. One of them is pulling down a Microsoft Windows settings PowerShell module. That's a V2 module, but we've added support for export to it that Winget knows it needs. It's going to make sure that it's got the right version of desired state that comes from the Microsoft Store, so that we're getting the 3.1 version at a minimum. It's going to then go and iterate over all of the settings that Winget has, all of the Windows settings. It's going to start applying those into the configuration file. The last thing it's going to do is iterate over every single installed package and add all of those as well. And it's quite interesting. Winget acting as a higher order tool, calling the DSC executable saying, hey, go export this thing for me. Most of those things are handled by Winget. So DSC in turn calls back into Winget as a V3 resource to get the metadata out in JSON, hands it back to Winget in JSON. Winget converts that to YAML so that we can put it in the configuration file. There's a lot going on there, but the reason we did it that way, we didn't want to have duplication of code and end up with different behaviors if you're calling a configuration using different tools. So now I'll go ahead and open up this configuration file in Visual Studio Code. Is that big enough for everybody to read in the back? Awesome. All right, so we can see at the top, it's telling you what version of Winget it was created from in a comment. We're using a slightly older schema version for DSC. We'll be updating that as well. We've got a few lines here on the beginning of the file that are describing that Winget should be doing the DSC v3 processor. And then we get into our first resources for Winget packages. And we're going to do things like installing and configuring all of our Winget settings. So you'll see I've got my rainbow progress bar and I've got Sixels enabled and a bunch of other fun things. We get down into our Windows settings. We go through looking at some other dependencies. And then we get down into this large collection of packages. So Winget literally has captured the current state of my device based on the Windows settings module and all of the v3 resources that are on the system. So I can literally just take this thing, copy it over to another system and run it over there. So hopefully the build machine is going to let me log into it. Here we go. So let me copy the configuration file. Paste that file on the desktop, and just for fun, make sure that I have the same version of Winget here. So I do. It hasn't updated me on that right now because it's in preview. This device would not have had a version of Winget that could handle this. So I had to manually bootstrap it. Once we go live and everything is stable, it's just a matter of making sure the device has the current version of Winget on it. So I will now kick off that configuration by double-clicking it the way we saw before. And it's the same process that you typically see. Winget's going to go through and analyze the file, make sure the syntax is valid, start checking to see that everything is there on the system. There's definitely some limitations on the metadata for the schema for the configuration. Right now, there's no way to go grab the resource beforehand to go look and see if the schema is there to be able to validate that there's not a mistake in the metadata. That's kind of the most common area that I see. where we have problems. We are working on some tooling for that, but it actually requires having those things on the system. I'm going to go ahead and tell it yes so that it can get going here. And I do expect one or two of the packages are probably going to fail because in the DevBox environment, there's some different security contexts. And with the Microsoft intra-ID, things like Microsoft Office being hooked up to corporate network, things like that might mess up. But you can see it's already gone in. It's already started doing some of the work here for making sure things are installed and doing settings. So you see the Winget admin settings got applied. It's now going in and applying the Windows settings. We should see it do the same thing that happened on the desktop. Taskbar gets shift left, OS goes into dark mode, and then you'll see it continue iterating through all of the rest of the packages that were installed. You'll notice it just kind of did a shrink down there, and that's because when you apply the Windows settings, Terminal picked up that dark mode change. It's not really a bug, it's just really how Terminal works. So I can zoom back in again, and here's one of the UACs that didn't behave well. So it will just continue going through and it'll literally install every single one of the packages from my desktop into this device. That's been one of the top pieces of feedback that we've gotten from the Microsoft DevBox team has been enterprises love this. It's a nice cloud environment. You've got all the enterprise management control on what's in it. But the developers, on the other hand, kind of have an opposite feeling. They're thinking, oh, you're forcing me to go into this environment that looks like a vanilla machine. It doesn't have dark mode. It doesn't have some other utilities that maybe are authorized that I prefer to use on my device. And as you go through and set up the DevBox, one of the options they give you is the ability to customize your DevBox by uploading your own configuration. And that actually takes a Winget configuration file so that when DevBox gets set up and has all of the required tooling and everything, it will still be able to go through and customize things to your liking. So it's really just a matter of understanding how to do that. And I'm sure when you looked at the YAML file that I was scrolling through pretty quickly, it was a lot to take in, and it's not very obvious what's going on in the schema. You probably wouldn't want to author all of that by hand. So the goal right now is this export grabs everything. You can clean it up by hand. But I think we're going to start looking at some tooling, and I actually put a request in our DSC repository to be able to say, hey, I want some kind of a UI experience to be able to build and edit configuration files. So I'm going to let that keep running. And I'm going to pull up our samples. So aka.ms/winget-samples is the URL that gets me here. It's just a redirect. It's going into the Winget DSC repository. I've already got the samples directory highlighted here. We have several different kinds of samples in here today. Note, today these are all based on the V2 configuration and the V2 resources. We will still be backward compatible. All of the configuration files that you built, you don't have to go rewrite them. Winget is going to understand their V2. It's going to run them that way. If they're a V3 configuration, we'll kick in and we'll orchestrate and we'll work with the DSC executable. Inside of our tutorials, we've got a handful that we've started building here from the Learn tutorials on the Microsoft Learn site, where it's looking at just different developer environment setups. If I go back into the samples, we've got DSC resources. These are all V2 resources that we've published and that we've built, and their source code is in this repository. And then on the main page for the samples, we actually have another link to GitHub projects. This is really the thing that I'm excited about. How many of you have worked on some kind of open source project somewhere? How many of your systems were exactly in the right state, didn't need any tools or any other code to work on that project? I see 0 hands in the room. That's kind of my lived experience as well. So typically you're going to go to the repo, you're going to have to dig through the README and reason about what the requirements and the dependencies and things like that are. It shouldn't have to be that way. Your process should be basically fork the repository, clone it on your local system, run some command that will just get your system configured for that project, and you're off to the races. So you'll notice on this list is Oh My Posh, which is one of my favorite things. You probably saw my prompt configured. And there's a configuration Winget file in the repository. And if I go to the main website, you'll see the Getting Started. When you look to Windows, includes Winget. So if I go down to Contributing and I say Get Started, I did select the Winget tab as opposed to the Manual tab, and you'll see exactly that. Fork and clone the repository, run the Winget configuration file, your environment set up, you're ready to code. That's really the desire. We did a lot of research many years ago, and we saw 3 top developer pain points. Number 1 was, honestly, my internal private wiki is missing, broken, out of date, incorrect, or confusing. Problem number 2, building and compiling code is slow. Problem number 3, getting my environment set up to be productive is hard. Even at Microsoft, it would typically take 2 weeks or more for a developer to be able to get everything set up correctly to work on the operating system. There's a lot of weird internal build tools and things like that. I'm happy to say that today it's much easier. We've got the Microsoft DevBox that you can jump into, and more of the internal repositories are starting to add support for these configuration files to be able to get your device in the desired state. So if you're doing any open source work, please go add configuration files. And if you do that, come back to the DSC repository and do a PR. We're happy to link those in here. We know that it helps best when there's a community of samples to go look at where you can see how other people did this themselves. Another common challenge is, and I'll show this at Power Toys, Visual Studio comes with different SKUs. So there's the community SKU, the pro SKU, and the enterprise SKU. All of those SKUs are different product IDs or package IDs to Winget. So what we didn't want to have happen is you have Visual Studio Pro or Enterprise, you go run the configuration, we install community, fill up your hard drive with another 2 gigs of stuff you probably don't want or need to make you sad. Right now, the recommendation is to build a configuration file when you've got different tool choices like that. So I've seen a few examples in Java where there's one configuration file that's for people who want to use Eclipse, for example, other configuration files for tools like NetBeans. We've had a lot of asks about people saying, oh, I want to put some conditional logic in my configuration file so that we can kind of determine what's there and based on what we find, do something different. My current position on that is no, you don't. You want to know exactly what your device is going to look like when you run your configuration file. That way, there's not any doubt or any questions about why a particular version of something is there. And whenever something throws an exception or tells you that it can't get it into the desired state, it's a little bit easier to understand and troubleshoot. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover from a demo standpoint. I am going to do another presentation probably later this week. I've got a screenshot here that I'll pull up in the presentation for you. I kicked off and created a DevBox this morning, and I got the lovely suboptimal region because of a slow response time, but I have not connected into that. My goal is that what I'm going to be able to do is another presentation where I can jump into that and show you that this is not contrived. If everything goes well tomorrow when Winget is GA, it'll just be get the stable version in that VM. I'll run through the same kind of a demo for that one and make sure that we don't have any problems with bootstrapping or getting things set up. And you may notice the first time you run an exported configuration or you bring one in from an export, you may see Winget doing a lot of work orchestrating, making sure that you've got the PowerShell modules you need, making sure that you've got desired state configuration and the right version on your device, and then it will start going through and getting to work. So now it's time for Q&A. Who's got the first question? All right, there's a microphone coming up for you.
Will Winget also support Bicep?
We've been having some discussions with a team about whether or not we would support Bicep. I think we are going to support it. The plan right now is when we get a configuration file, we're going to attempt to analyze what it is. If we detect it's a Bicep file, we're going to kind of play dumb and just hand that file over to DSC-exe and let it run with it. Unless there's a really compelling reason that we need to go validate or analyze something in that file, we're likely just to display its contents and that same kind of scary warning and just hand it off to the DSC engine so that it can work. One of our big goals is to not make you learn a new syntax, not let you be in a position where all the investments are garbage and you have to rewrite everything. A lot of the goal here is take the investments you've already made, make it easy just to modernize that process and go with it. And if you're not doing configuration as code, we're trying to get you a native solution that supports this.
And when will the fonts be general available?
Fonts is experimental right now. We're going to add a new fonts directory to the community repository. We've got to set up validation to make sure that there's not any malicious code in them. We've done some research and there are examples of this happening. The other thing we need to do is make sure that we're not getting any inappropriate glyphs in anything that gets submitted, but we will get that all set up. All of this information is actually publicly tracked on GitHub. Any one of our repositories will have a link at the top at GitHub to what's called projects. That project is public. You'll see what I've kind of pulled in as what I think are the current things that are important in the to-do column. There's one that you can see if it's been assigned to an engineer to work on it. There's a section for things that are on hold, and that's either because they're big or complex or we had a blocker. You'll be able to see what's in progress, what's done, and what's released. Everything, I try to be as transparent as I can about not only what we're working on, but also why. So if there's concerns or questions, feel free to start a discussion on GitHub or just send me an email. I'm happy to talk about that.
And then the last question. When will the Winget REST source be in the marketplace?
I don't have an answer for that one. We have had a lot of back and forth discussions. Honestly, the biggest concern is we built it as a reference implementation, pretty heavyweight, pretty expensive to run when you're looking at Cosmos DB on the back end and a lot of other things. We are having some discussions about whether or not we take a lighter weight implementation and offer one or both. And there's also the question about yet another thing to support. Winget looks like it's this lovely little CLI on the front end, and that's all we have to do. We have a massive CDN infrastructure. We have the community repository of packages that we validate. We've got the REST source to build and maintain. We've got all the work we're doing on desired state configuration and several other small projects that are also related. So Winget is really a constellation of services. And given all of the things in the ecosystem that are integrated with Winget, one of our numbers that we like to measure internally, we call it monthly active devices. And it essentially means, hey, this device has sent us some kind of a telemetry event at least 2 different days out of the last 28. Our monthly active devices is about the same as the number of Windows devices that have been updated. So it's pretty deeply embedded in there. Microsoft Store recently added support for version numbers for their Win32 unpackaged applications. We're doing some more work there. It's coming. Part of the reason I showed the milestones and the release dates, I knew for enterprise customers that you needed some predictability. So we ship on the last Tuesday in February, June, and October, so that we're avoiding the end of the year holidays for most folks. That gives me a chance before build when we make big announcements to get the release in for that. So it's pretty common looking at those features. You'll see more of the enterprise features happen towards the end of the calendar year for us. Then we will kind of try to finish those up and begin the foundation for the developer-focused features. You'll see that's typically the February release. And then you'll see the release typically in June is all of the work we're doing leading up for build, which is what I showed today. Any other questions?
Hi. Is there a way to use Winget with offline repositories or on-prem?
Is there a way to use it offline? So you can have a private source set up in some kind of an air-gapped environment. There is an open source project. Sadly, I don't remember what it is. Somebody built a Winget source in a Docker container. So you can actually load packages through a Winget source in a Docker container, literally host that in a completely isolated offline device and run it that way. I haven't played with that one. I know that it was built and released a few years ago. I don't know if there's still been some investment there, but if that's something that's critical, let me know.
Okay, thank you.
So what about working with Windows Server? Is this a supported scenario, or how do you look at configuring a desired state for clients and for Windows Server?
So Winget is included in the box in Windows Server 2025, and it is an optional feature in 25 Server Core. If you run into a bug on Server Core, it's probably because of locale. So either put your default locale in your Winget settings or pass one in as an argument. And yes, all of this functionality is expected and anticipated to work on Server 2025 and whatever newer versions we release. There's also a very subtle difference in how they get updated. Winget on the desktop is updated through the Microsoft Store by default. So if you've disabled the store update service in your enterprise, you're not going to get updates. You're going to have to find another way to handle that. Either use the PowerShell commandlet that pulls it down from GitHub or modify it to meet your needs. On Windows Server, we actually get distributed through the Windows updates, the LCU. So if you're keeping your server patched, you should get the new versions of Winget along with you. I think it was 1.7 was the first version that we actually had tested in. We had released 1.8, and I had the team go through and actually do a Windows update and test it to make sure that it worked, and it did. I don't remember off the top of my hand which version is in box now, but our process normally when we release Winget is we give it a couple of weeks to make sure there's not a big flaw or regression or security problem. Then we will go through a process to go check that in. But the OS is on a much slower cycle, so it can take several months for it to get out. I know a lot of challenges were happening with people doing a fresh install or a fresh Azure VM and ending up with a version of Winget that's outdated. As long as you have Winget 1.6 or newer, where we have the full dependency support, you can use Winget to update itself. You can either do Winget upgrade Winget, or you can do the get Winget package and pipe that through and get it updated in the PowerShell module. But that is where we're moving, as a world where you don't really have to worry about that bootstrapping, but we still have a lot of those challenges today. Anybody else got any questions? In the front row, maybe? All right. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. Feel free to grab me anytime if you want to talk about this, outside of the session. Don't want to say anything in front of anybody, and appreciate your time.